a proud Howard alum. And when they leave and go out and return to visit, we have to give them a bison welcome. Do you know what it is? We're going to give Dr. Barbara Josiah a great bison welcome. H.U.
You know.
H.U.
You know.
H.U.
You know.
So who is Dr. Barbara Josiah? She is an associate professor of history at John Jay College, SUNY. She specializes in the history of the African diaspora, with particular emphasis on African retentions in transatlantic communities, including financial accumulations and global migration related to gold, diamond, and bauxite mining. Dr. Josiah graduated from John Jay College with a degree in political science in 1990. She earned a Master's of Arts degree in United States history from Howard University in 1992, where she also received her doctorate in Latin American and Caribbean history in 1998. While Dr. Josiah was a graduate student, she was awarded first place prizes for her essays in the Rafer W. Logan Association for the Study of African American Life and History and Phi Alpha Theta International Honors Society in History competition. Her award-winning essay was published in the Society's journal, The Historian. Dr. Josiah is the author of Migration, Mining, and the African Diaspora, Guyana in the 19th and 20th centuries. She has published myriad articles on many subjects, including the service of sailors from the diaspora in the United States Navy during the Civil War, also the contributions of Howard alumni in the African diaspora. She has shared her scholarship with local, national, and international audiences. Today, she is going to be talking to us, and this is a very long title here. She's going to be talking about educational migration from the Caribbean to Howard University, education for America and the global community, and the achievements and contribution of Guyanese students from Howard University. So, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Dr. Josiah again. Okay, come on up. So welcome. You can move it to your own.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. I must also thank the organizers of this event for affording me the opportunity to express my appreciation to the faculty and staff of the Department of History and Geography, especially Dr. Edna Green Medford, for all the years of nurturing. The focus of my address today, educational migration from the Caribbean to Howard University, educating for America and the global community, and the achievements and contributions of Guyanese alumni is part of a larger study focusing on healthcare professionals and their contributions in several countries in the 20th and 21st centuries. An excerpt was published in the Bulletin of Caribbean History, May 2017. as the first Caribbean and Guyanese woman to earn a PhD in Latin America and Caribbean history from Howard University, it is incumbent on me to heed the words of Alice Walker, and I quote, "We are a people do not throw away their geniuses, and if they are thrown away, it is our duty as artists and witnesses for the future to collect them for the sake of our children, and if necessary, bone by bone," end of quote. During December 1996, while I was in Guyana and interviewing former internal labor migrants who had left their coastal villages to work seasonally in the interior gold and diamond fields for my doctoral dissertation, I often inquired, "How did you take care of your health when you were away from home?" The answers became a refrain, and I quote, "I would get something from Miss Frida or Mommy Fifi, Sister Eunice, or Mrs. Toussaint to walk with." I decided to interview the traditional bush medicine women, and all of them explained how the older generation, including fathers, grandfathers, mothers, and grandmothers, stretching back to Africa, had taught them their skills to heal the body. Miss Frida, she's right there in the middle, was the exception. She not only healed the body, but also the mind. In other words, she was a healer and preacher. I decided that Miss Frida and the others deserve their rightful places in this study. Decades later, I read a 1909 article, "The Training of Ministers and Physicians for the Negro Race," by the then president of Howard University, Wilbur P. Thurfield, who identified many illnesses and social failures of U.S. African Americans to justify the need for the university's medical and theological departments. 2 weeks ago, at the ASALH conference, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History in Cincinnati, Ohio, I attended the presentation, "The Legacy of the Black Medical Schools and Departments in the United States." There's a couple of copies you could look at, but you can't take it away. I leave them as aids for my classes when I teach. By the Moncrief family from Detroit, Michigan. The presentation was quite an eye-opener for several reasons. The presenters were generational: grandmother, great-aunt, daughter, niece, granddaughter, and grandson, no older than 14 years of age. The son had missed his flight. They were medical practitioners, media trained, and included Howard alum. The presentation began with a discussion on African traditional medical, dental, surgical, orthopedic, and other healthcare practices, such as inoculation and bloodletting, and segued into how enslaved Africans healed themselves in the United States and the coming of black medical schools and departments and their travails and triumphs. My research and address today encapsulates some of the above and also include the value and utility of educational migration to this place, Howard University. The discourse, spanning the 19th and 21st centuries, includes Howard's Caribbean alumni from Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Barbados, Cuba, Haiti, Grenada, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Trinidad and Tobago, for example, and also Bermuda, but centers overwhelmingly on the achievements and contributions of selected Guyanese alumni to healthcare and societal reforms globally. The outcomes of their education at Howard U are critical in analyzing how the institution accomplished its mantra, educating for America and the global community, by its 150th anniversary. The environment is critical to examining the regional migration to Howard and the consequences, in particular, the abilities, actions, and laudable efforts of the selected Guyanese alumni pivots within and outside the parameters of unfriendly topographic, hydraulic, climatic, and geographic conditions of the 19th and 20th centuries. The formidable miasma-inducing waterways resulted from floods and stagnant conditions, led to diseases and deadly situations among the country's population, who encountered hostile receptions in their dealings with British colonial officials. The study examines the ways in which healthcare professionals utilized measures and initiated ways to counter inhospitable environments and deal with a status quo bent on interfering with their educational aims and visions for progress. In 1886, British officials enacted a law, Ordinance Number 5 of that year, to deny North American trained medical practitioners from registering to practice at government-run healthcare facilities in its colonies, except similar credentials were also obtained in the United Kingdom. 2 years later, on his return to the then British Guiana, Canadian-trained Dr. John Monteith Rollaire found the said law's application to him unacceptable. Thereafter, Dr. Rollaire and others challenged what was in fact a contradictory measure that was selectively applied. Although by the early 1900s, Guyanese and other Caribbean graduates of Howard University College of Medicine encountered similar treatment as Dr. Roller, cognizance of the restrictive legislation did not deter them from pursuit of North American training. For generations, British Caribbean students were undaunted by that state of affairs and pursued higher education at Howard and professional expertise in the United States, seeking solutions to problems bedeviling their countries. In colonial Guyana, the uncompromising, contradictory, spiteful, and racist British policies undermined the health care and welfare of the colony's population. Morbidity and mortality rates increased throughout the 19th and into the 20th century, but the restrictive law of 1886 was still selectively utilized to deny non-British trained local doctors from addressing the population's health care needs. Even with the requisite credentials, colonial bureaucrats still obfuscated on the employment of these practitioners and bluntly stated that their African ancestry was the disqualifier. Some returning doctors challenged the restriction with little or no success initially. Others switched their careers, while many of them remained in the United States or moved elsewhere and critiqued British and American imperialism. Eventually, the restrictive laws and policies were contested in the nucleus of the empire, Great Britain. Factors influencing migration from sending to host countries require delineation. Thus, the composition of students who attended HBCUs and Howard is worthy of examination because links and connections to host countries influence migratory movements. For example, U.S. African Americans voluntarily migrated to Guyana in the 1840s before slavery ended in their homeland. Their offspring could have been included among local immigrants to the U.S. from the late 19th century. People never forget their origins and ancestors. By that time, the AME Zion, a U.S. African American religious body, and Congregationalists were among American institutions that established churches and schools in the colony. Research findings from records of HBCUs included in this study revealed the links and connections between the above events and underscore reasons for the educational migration to Howard. In addition, from 1861 to 1865, the Federal Union Navy recruited hemispheric sailors to fight in the U.S. Civil War, a labor-intensive conflict, and caused another migration to the United States. After the war ended African diaspora sailors in the U.S. Civil War Navy, many of whom had been maritime workers or already resident in the U.S., returned and settled in urban areas. For example, Washington, D.C., where Howard University was established in 1867. The area experienced a surge of incoming migrants, and Howard aimed to educate, and I quote, individuals irrespective of race, sex, creed, or national origin, end of quote. Interestingly, among the depositors of the Washington, D.C. branch of the Freedmen's Savings Bank, a largely African-American financial repository established in 1865, were later on Caribbean students such as a Barbadian, Samuel King, who was enrolled at Howard University Medical School. Hospital and other vital statistics confirm the urgency to address healthcare situations in colonial Guyana, but professionals also had to deal with obdurate and racist British colonial officials who enacted legislation to limit their work. Adequately addressing the morbidity and mortality situations was not the concern of the officials whose policies and laws were geared to benefit themselves and progeny, to thwart the ambitions of locals, and to keep them in subservient positions or ministering or teaching. Contemporary and comparative situations affected people of African ancestry, including the majority of students at Howard, who grappled with situations of racism, prejudice, discrimination, and inequality due to the behavior of unfriendly whites in the larger society. Many of the students had occupied disease-prone spaces with influenza, pneumonia, tuberculosis, and other contagious, where influenza, pneumonia, tuberculosis, and other contagious and deadly disease were pervasive. Jim Downs in Sick from Freedom, African American Illnesses and Suffering During the War and Reconstruction, explains the woeful government neglect of African Americans' health care and welfare. Simultaneously, as the 19th century ensued, British officials' ambivalence remained intact towards the majority of the Guyanese population in largely inhospitable settings from which the eventual Howard alumni originated. But in reality, these experiences made Howard an oasis and a nurturing place. Moreover, their similar racial profiles, this is the Howard University's earliest students, their similar racial profiles and history fostered interrelationships between the students in the US, a feature that was unlike the situation in Great Britain, where colonial newcomers encountered mostly uncaring white student and professional bodies largely ignorant of the vestiges of enslavement. British colonial students in the United Kingdom were also in the midst of an unwelcoming nascent white civil population. Brexit is not new. Activists, medical professionals dominate this discourse, until Guyana achieved nationhood in 1966. The study connects the struggle to change British policies and laws while drawing attention to shortcomings in disparate communities, efforts to influence reforms, and to improve conditions. The study acknowledges the negative attitudes of colonial officials to local-born doctors, but taking center stage in the analysis is how healthcare practitioners' intimacy and knowledge of their environments empowered them to aspire and strive for higher education and professional training, to mount challenges against the status quo, and to foster reforms and national development. This crescendo or finale to my two previous studies on working class migration segues into that of the emerging middle and professional class, who are beneficiaries of a Howard education and their contributions globally. Our long-departed chairman of the Department of History, Professor Dr. Rayford Logan, in his seminal study published to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Alma Mater, entitled Howard University, the First 100 Years, 1867 to 1967, includes Caribbean and hemispheric-wide alumni. Dr. Calvin H. Sinnett in Howard University College of Medicine and the Education of Caribbean-born Medical Doctors, published in the Journal of the National Medical Association, focuses on the education of physicians who, and I quote, were born in the islands of the Caribbean or in mainland neighboring countries, end of quote. Dr. Sinnett explained that their shared historical, cultural, and linguistic heritage warranted the inclusion of Bermudans, Bahamians, Guyanese, and others from mainland countries who chose to obtain their professional education at HU. To capture the essence of the strengths of the selected exemplary Guyanese alumni and the role of Howard University in fortifying them from ever losing sight of their commitments to improve the conditions of humanity in the face of adversities, environments matter in life choices. Therefore, to tell the human story effectively, a philosophy of history focused on reliving the experiences of others is important. In this case, to feel the experiences of the early alumni, I had to get the feeling of the ambience of the rustic localities or contexts from where some of them originated. on Emancipation Day, the 1st of August 2016, I was part of a 10-hour return boat trip up the Kanji River, Berbice, deep in Guyana, to experience one of the miasma exuding, disease-inducing waterways that influence ancestors to initiate ways to improve the welfare and health care of the population. Some of the locals expressed reservations that about me coming from America, a Howard graduate, to travel for so long in a less than sophisticated vessel. In any case, to feel our ancestors in their surroundings, Anyway, my first-hand experiences of the setting with water everywhere, land balloons and all, was enlightening. Aspirants for overseas education with their lived experiences and intimate knowledge of situations that jeopardize the well-being of the population pursued higher education and professional expertise to find solutions associated with life and death in the Guyana of their times. They understood that environments matter and the challenges human development faced in the country and elsewhere. Howard University catalog of students identify a number of regional attendees at the institution since 1872 with the coming of Bermudian Charles W. Smith. By the early 1900s, Barbadians, Jamaicans, other West Indians, and Guyanese, including Peter MacD Milliard, migrated to the United States ostensibly for a Howard education. Milliard was born in 1882. He earned a pharmacy degree in 1907 and an MD in 1910 from the College of Medicine. He worked in several capacities at Howard and Freedman's Hospital, later Howard University Hospital. Dr. Milliard relocated to the Panama Canal Zone and served as a physician and surgeon at the US-established Anson Hospital, the largest general hospital south of the US, the only hospital in the region that could handle any class of cases with all modern equipment and apparatus necessary for diagnostic purpose and operative procedure. Patients throughout the Americas sought treatment at Anson Hospital. One can surmise on Dr. Milliard's decision to serve in Panama rather than in his homeland, where the morbidity and mortality rates were high. Diseases were similar to those he had been trained to treat and cure. The topography, geography, and climate in Panama was similar to his homeland, and Guyanese were in dire need of the quality services such as he could provide. Understandably, Dr. Milliard may not have wanted to endure the continuous conflict in the colony, stemming in part from restrictive colonial laws in force. It was a tumultuous time in Guyana with the aforementioned Dr. Olair, his supporters, legislators, emerging trade unionists, media personalities, and organization members arrayed against the strictures of impolitic British administrators. At Anson Hospital, Dr. Milliard distinguished himself, as was noted by his colleagues in the Star and Herald, a Panamanian newspaper, on March the 23rd, 1917. And I quote, "Dr. Milliard scores remarkable medical success," end of quote, refers to his resuscitation of a patient after medical experts had given her up for dead. His accurate diagnosis and successful treatment underscored that training and competence acquired at Howard University were memorialized for posterity as among the best anywhere. The Flexner Report, released in 1910, the year of Dr. Milliard's graduation, had recommended the closing of all African American medical schools due to their unfitness to provide adequate training, except Howard and Meharry. You could look at the booklet at the end of the presentation. Contemporary case studies and research exposes in the Journal of the National Medical Association, published by African American healthcare professionals, many of them Howard graduates, were on par with those in transactions of the British Guiana branch of the British Medical Association and proceedings of the Panamanian Medical Association. Yet US and Howard trained Dr. Milliard was banned from employment in the empire, while at the same time British colonial officials allowed Canadians to construct a hospital in Guyana's mining region similar to the US one in Panama. Discrimination was rife in the Canal Zone. However, Dr. Milliard's activism and advocacy to improve the lot of West Indian migrant workers, their families, and others landed him in the crosshairs of American officials, especially since he was a supporter of the Marcus Garvey movement. Surveillance by the Bureau of Investigations, later the FBI, was followed by Dr. Milliard's departure for Manchester, England in 1922. In 1923, Dr. Milliard earned British medical credentials and widened his creative activism. He was a founding member and a vice chairperson of the International African Friends of Ethiopia, formed in London in 1935 to contest Italy's invasion of Ethiopia and the placid response of Great Britain and the League of Nations. A key organizer and chairman of the 1945 Fifth Pan-African Congress held in Manchester, Dr. Milliard introduced and shared the stage with Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and Amy Ashworth Garvey, a wife of Marcus Garvey. I couldn't get a better picture of the scene at the 5th Pan-African Congress, but I'll keep trying. Many intellectuals view that Congress as the catalyst for the modern civil rights movement. Dr. Milliard, who died in 1952, embodied the lived experiences of grappling with British colonialism and American imperialism. After graduation from Harvard in 1941, Dr. Denbo returned home. Dr. Denbo was a graduate of Harvard's dental school. He operated a private dental practice, was a trade unionist, formed a political party, established schools, encouraged the teaching of African languages, was a community organizer, and president of the local League of Colored Peoples, organized in 1931 in London to fight racism and social discrimination in European colonies. The LCP was formed by Jamaican-born Dr. Harold A. Moody along the lines of the NAACP, with the assistance of the then chair of Howard University History Department, Dr. Charles Harris Wesley, who was in Great Britain on a fellowship. Dr. Denbo understood the value of networking. For instance, in his determination to host an African dignitary in the colony in the early 1950s, he encountered the disdain of British officials who opposed extending royal protocol to the impending visitor, Prince or King Ezzy. Wasting little time, Dr. Denbo, along with the LCP's legal advisor, the late Sir John P. Carter, traveled to the United States and met with Dr. Ralph Bunche at the United Nations headquarters at Lake Success. Possibly, Dr. Bunche may have taught Denbo at Howard U as their times here overlapped. Nonetheless, Dr. Bunche soon sorted out the British officials and the royal visit occurred, captured on the poster. As president of the LCP, Dr. Denbo also organized the publication of its organ, The Sentinel. He invited the president of Howard University, Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, with whom he had remained in contact to write the foreword of the newspaper's inaugural edition. President Johnson Day. You could view it on the poster. On one occasion, at the annual LCP fair, a cultural, entertainment, entrepreneurial, and fundraising extravaganza that Dr. Denbo had instituted, he chaperoned the colony's governor and his wife to view the exhibits. The poster shows Aaron Hope, the father of Howard University alumni and former faculty member of the Department of History and Geography, Dr. Walter Hope. I'm doing this because he's sitting right there, showing his ceramic tiles. The pictures are there for you to view. The elder Hope was a building construction proprietor and entrepreneur. Still, Dr. Denbo was tireless in his endeavors and made contributions in myriad ways to the development of the Guyanese people. He facilitated countless students to attend Howard. In 1967, he was honored with a prestigious Howard University Distinguished Alumni Award and lauded as, and I quote, a leader in encouraging large numbers of students to matriculate at Howard. Dr. Denbo exemplified how people shape their culture. He initiated waves to crumble colonialism in the colony and enabled the ascendancy of LFS Burnham, the first elected Guyanese president of the new nation. A momentous era had dawned. The barriers limiting North American trained locals from practice at the colony's government-run healthcare institutions absolutely disappeared. Note that after Dr. Edward L.C. Brooms, MD, Howard University, 1942, a friend of Dr. Denbo, he had pelted the most recent salvos against the restrictive laws applied to medical practitioners who look like him. A perusal of the laws of British Guyana since Ordinance 5 of 1886, an ordinance to establish a government medical service and to enforce the registration of practitioners in medicine and surgery, through Ordinance 15 of 1908, specifically applied to dental practitioners, and until the 1940s, the enactment of copious ordinances affecting healthcare personnel continued unabated. Dr. Brooms, who died in 1999, established a thriving medical practice in East Chicago in 1945. For many years, he made many philanthropic journeys to Guyana, ferrying and donating healthcare supplies to government institutions. Dr. Brooms helped to develop Mabaruma Northwest District in the interior jungle area where he was born. Brooms Hill is named in his honor, and Brooms Guest House is among his entrepreneurial ventures. Dr. Brooms contested the colonial medical strictures by writing scathing letters to the media, further exposing the nefariousness of the British colonial administrators. He was incensed at the provisions of the medical ordinances and created such a ruckus in the 1940s that a flurry of amending legislation were enacted, such as Ordinance 24 of 1947 and Ordinance 10 of 1949 to provide for the registration of certain medical practitioners and holders of a diploma obtained by examination after attending a prescribed medical course at a medical school approved by the American or Canadian medical associations. Dr. Robert L.S. Baird became Guyana's first local-born and bred chief medical officer in 1967, 1 year after independence. Dr. Baird, a high school classmate of the late President Forbes Burnham, served in several capacities in the USA and Guyana. He completed postgraduate studies in cardiology, was a research association at the National Institutes of Neurological Disease and Blindness, and a board-certified pediatrician. Dr. Baird was also responsible for the Howard University Medical Students Pediatric Program. In 1962, he was a recipient of a Howard University Service Award and also elected as a Fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics. After military service at the U.S. Naval Hospital, Dr. Baird was a clinical associate professor, Department of Pediatrics, Howard University College of Medicine. Dr. Baird returned to Guyana as a senior consultant pediatrician at the main medical institution, the public hospital, Georgetown. Later on, as the chief medical officer, he was responsible for the country's entire healthcare system. Dr. Baird also recruited and supported all of his younger siblings to attend Howard. Among them, a dentist, an engineer, surgeon, and architect who also returned to Guyana and contributed to the colony's development. Dr. Baird, a recipient of the Buxton Village Scholarship Award in 1934 that enabled him to attend the most prestigious high school in Guyana en route to Howard, currently contributes to the Simbox Buxton Village Fund. At 93 years of age, he is living, whereas in Northwest DC, not far from Howard. Dr. Baird is credited with employing the country's first female cardiologist, Dr. Enid Denbo, who graduated with a Bachelor of Science from Howard in 1951. This brings me to the last Howard grad, Dr. E. Nigel Harris, and this will take me about 3¼ minutes. In 1968, E. Nigel Harris graduated from Howard University, Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, magna cum laude, Phi Alpha Kappa. Decades later, the U.S. Congress of the House of Representatives proclaimed 11th February 2015 a day in honor of Dr. Harris, then Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Jamaica. To all appearances, this was the first time that a Caribbean alumnus of Howard U was afforded such an honor by the U.S. Congress. This event is significant because it verified the university's mantra of educating for America and the global community. After Dr. Harris left Howard, he earned a Master of Science at the University of Pennsylvania and medical degrees from Harvard and UWI in Jamaica. He became a world-renowned rheumatologist because of his research on antiphospholipid standardization laboratory and developed the internationally known Harris standards. Among the beneficial outcomes of Harris's Howard education are Currently, he's the Chancellor of the University of Guyana. He served as the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Jamaica. He was Dean and Senior VP for Academic Affairs at Morehouse School of Medicine and was a Professor of Medicine and Chief of the Division of Rheumatology at the University of Kentucky. Conclusively, Howard alumni were among people of African descent who bore the brunt of racism and government interference, but never lost sight of their intentions to serve their compatriots and humanity. The endurance, services, achievements, and contributions of these alumni and others in the US, Panama, Great Britain, Jamaica, and Guyana ensured the chain of educational migrants to Howard remains unbroken as the university celebrates its 150th anniversary and continues to fulfill its mantra of educating for America and the global community. Thank you. Oh.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Josiah? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Josiah, for your talk. I learned a lot about Howard students from Guyana and how graduates who have impacted the world. You mentioned Dr. Milliard, who was at the 1945 Manchester Pan-African Congress.
Yes.
I studied Amy Ashland Garvey through Tony Martin, who wrote a biography of her.
Right.
And Lionel Yard. Could you talk about Milliard, his beliefs about Pan-Africanism, if any? Because you said he was a member of the International African Service Bureau.
Right. Well, it became clear to Dr. Milliard from the time he went to Panama to work in the Panama Canal Zone, and that was about 1913, 14, just as the Marcus Garvey movement was evolving, that the need for such a movement meant that people of African descent, not only in the United States or Guyana, because remember he was Guyanese and he lived in the United States, and he understood the ways in which they were treated in a hostile manner, as if they were unwanted because the time for them had come and gone because they'd given their free labor for centuries. So he goes to Panama and he's confronted with the same situation that was affecting Africans or people of African descent in other areas that he had experienced. He became involved in the Garvey movement, which was in fact a Pan-African movement. And for whatever reason, there were others among the group who were agents. This was the formation of the Bureau of Investigations that would become the FBI. And in the records I looked at, there were those among them who were attending the Garvey meetings and taking information to the American authorities. And so one thing led to the next, and he decided to go to Great Britain. There again, in Manchester and elsewhere, he was confronted with hostilities that people of African descent experience. So he felt, unlike the situation that would develop where the LCP that I mentioned the LCP was established along the lines of the NAACP. And some people refer to it as an integrationist organization. But Milliard felt that he didn't have time for an integrationist organization. And so that is how he became involved in the Pan-African movement, because that movement had roots earlier in the 1900s. So it wasn't new. But with his experiences, as I would say, in diaspora, it would galvanize him. And then, of course, in the US and Great Britain, he encountered a lot of African students. So if you read the information, you see that he's very conscious that the same situations affected Africans everywhere. So he became a Pan-Africanist to address that situation. Okay.
So let's
Did that help?
Yes, it does.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara Josiah, for that enlightening keynote. And now we'll move right into the panel discussion. And to handle that, I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Edna Medford.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. Our program this afternoon has two components. The first, represented by Dr. Josiah's address, considers the impact of Howard University graduates from the Caribbean as they made their way in the world. The second component will consist of a panel discussion on the global impact of the history department specifically. The department has always been considered a jewel in the crown that is Howard University. It is our hope that at the end of this discussion, you will have a better sense of the significance of our department specifically and of historical study in general. Our panel consists of three persons who have been intimately involved with the department. Our first panelist is Mr. Julius C Jefferson Jr., and I'm going to read his bio very briefly. What I'm going to do is introduce each one of them, and in turn, they will do a 5 to 7 minute presentation, great, and then we'll have a discussion. Julius C Jefferson Jr.'s current position as supervisor of librarians who provide public policy research assistance to members of Congress, congressional committees, and staff follows having served as information research specialist in the Government and Finance Division of the Congressional Research Service, reference librarian in Humanities and Social Sciences Reading Room, and Leadership Development Fellow. And you can read a lot of this is in the bio that's printed. Mr. Jefferson is an active member of the library community and holds membership and leadership positions in a number of professional organizations. Currently, he serves as a member of the Executive Board of the American Library Association and formerly has served as president of the Freedom to Read Foundation, president of the District of Columbia Library Association, chair of the ALA Intellectual Freedom Committee, and executive board of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. He's a popular speaker on issues of librarianship and information science, addressing topics germane to librarianship, including diversity, intellectual freedom, technology, and leadership. He is a bit of a media celebrity as well, having appeared on a number of television and radio programs, including Voice of America and National Public Radio. He is co-editor of the 21st Century Black Librarian in America, Issues and Challenges, which received the 2013 Outstanding Contributions to Publishing citation by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. But most important of all, Mr. Jefferson is an alum of the Department of History's undergraduate program And as I recall, since he was my student many, many years ago, neither of us is going to tell you how many years, and as a student in my class, he was a rather vocal member. He has a Master of Library Science degree with a concentration on archives and museum studies with the University of Maryland. Our second speaker will be Ms. Sonia Woods. As your program indicates, Ms. Woods is an archivist in the University Archives Division of Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. But her most important role is as a doctoral student in our Department of History, where she has completed her coursework and comprehensive examination. She's currently working on the dissertation topic, Contributions of the Southern Africa Support Project to the Anti-Apartheid Movement in the Washington metropolitan area. Although she has yet to take one of my courses, and I'm sure that's going to change very soon, I have been the beneficiary of her excellent research. She's a wonderful archivist, and I thank her for the work that she has done to assist me. So we certainly are looking forward to the completion of your dissertation, Ms. Woods. Ms. Woods graduated from North Carolina Central University with a BA in English Literature and an MA in History. Her master's thesis examined the African-American origins of the Tabilana Massacre of 1921 in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. And she has been actively involved in the Trans-Africa Forum, the African American Civil War Museum, and has served as an intern with the Howard University Republic of South Africa project. Dr. Josiah, whom you already know because she has just presented her, you know, everything there is to know about her except that she is an incredible researcher. She has worked with me as well very closely when she was a student in the department, and I have to say that I have never encountered a better researcher than Dr. Josiah. So each one of you in turn will do a brief presentation, and then we can discuss a bit. Mr. Jefferson, if you would.
All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Medford. I want to thank Ms. Daniel for inviting me back to the Hilltop. I don't get a chance to come back up here often. I drive past here on a daily basis on my way to work, but rarely do I get to come back to the Hilltop. And when she asked me to speak, I said, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm a librarian now. You know, most of my work is dealing with library science. And then she told me that Dr. Medford was going to be moderating. I said, well, I guess I have to be there because she is still my teacher and will always be my teacher. So, can you hear me? Okay, I think they can hear me. I probably don't need a mic. So, I came to Howard University because Howard University was considered the Mecca. How many came to Howard because they heard Howard was the Mecca? Yeah, the Mecca. And so I always wondered, what made Howard University the Mecca? I mean, was it the football team? Because it certainly probably wasn't the football team or the sports teams. But certainly, when I got here, I found out why Howard was the Mecca. And one of the reasons why Howard was the Mecca is the Howard University History Department. Because this is where, for me, it all begins for Howard University. And so when we talk about the History Department and we talk about these individuals, we talk about excellence, we talk about greatness. When I think of historians of the 20th century, a couple of names come to mind. First, of course, as Dr. Josiah mentioned, W.E.B. Du Bois comes to mind. But then I think about Carter G. Woodson. And I think about Charles Harris Wesley. And I think about Rayford Logan. And I think about John Hope Franklin. And I think about, wow, Woodson, Wesley, Logan, John Hope Franklin, what do they all have in common? They all started right here at Howard University teaching. And so when I think about, I think about how this came about, it was very intentional that some 44 years after the university was founded, that we had this, what became a thriving history department led by Carter G. Woodson. Of course, there were individuals like Kelly Miller who kind of put this together, but it was Carter G. Woodson who decided that, you know, we needed to start having classes that talked about the Negro. And I'll say Negro because that was the term that he used during that time. And it was Carter G. Woodson that kind of put it all in motion back in 1919 when he came to Howard University. Carter G. Woodson left. And of course, when I think about Carter G. Woodson, and I was telling Dr. Medford this, I think about the connections that Woodson had to the community because, see, before Woodson actually came to Howard University, Woodson taught at a school down the street they called Dunbar High School, but it was called M Street High School, where the greatest of scholars were teaching there and were nurtured there. And I heard nurturing in Dr. Josiah's presentation as well, because that's what I got when I came here. I got nurtured, and that's what the history department did. But so from Carter G. Woodson to Charles Harris Wesley, who led the history department and sort of ushered in this whole idea that, you know, we were going to focus on great research, scholarship. We're going to focus on activism, and we were going to focus on teaching. And that's what Wesley led. He sort of passed that down to Rayford Logan, and Rayford Logan happened to have been a recipient of the teachings of Carter G. Woodson. So you see, there were a lot of parallels, because this wasn't by accident that Howard was the Mecca. With these individuals, Howard was destined to be the Mecca. You see, it was Rayford Logan who graduated from M Street High School and went on to college and went on to the war. The First World War. It was during the First World War, after the war ended, that he stayed on in France and that he was sort of indoctrinated into the ideas of Pan-Africanism by W.B. Du Bois. Rayford Logan, just like Wesley, just like Du Bois, went to Harvard University and got his PhD. He came back here, right, to be with his people, to be an activist scholar. And he sort of like led that history department for many years. It was Rayford Logan who staffed that history department and brought in folks like Mertz Tate, who was an outstanding teacher. I mean, you sort of kind of don't, if you're in the history department, you don't think about how these things are connected, but I was taught by individuals who were taught by Mertz Tate. So I didn't know her, and she wasn't around teaching when I was here as a student, but I certainly was the recipient of other teachers who told me about how tough she was and how stern she was. And I think that sort of, that discipline in teaching certainly is something that I got from Dr. Medford, who certainly was a very disciplined teacher. So I hope that when we think about, you know, why Howard is a Mecca, we think about the history department of Howard University. So I'm going to stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming and hanging around. I want to thank Ms. Daniel again for asking me to speak today. She gave me the topic, so that was, as soon as she said the global impact of the Department of History at Howard University, no problem, got it. So, and thank you, Dr. Medford, for being the moderator here. And I'll come sit in on some classes that I don't have to pay for. Yeah, maybe I'll sit in. Okay, so really quickly, this, you can still hear me, right? Okay, so the global impact of Howard University's history department, professionalization of Africana historical study. Now, I got that phrase actually from Michael Winston, who was the first director of Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. He was also a product of the Department of History. In 1973, the History Department celebrated 60 years of existence. And so there was big programs and events and lecture series and symposiums. But Michael Winston wrote a paper, a history of the Department of History. And in that introduction to that paper, he talks about the professionalization of Africana, not necessarily Africana, but historical study, the professionalization of historical study, as one of the broad developments that he was going to discuss in his history of the history department. So in talking about the history department, I personally have to speak about African history because that's my major, and my minor is Africana history. So when we talk about the professionalization of Africana historical study, I think about three people. Off top. I don't know if this is going to work. See, it's not connected. No problem. The first three people that I think about, Carter G Woodson, William Leo Hansberry, and Joseph Errol Harris, who's still with us, who's still here today. And so they are part of my genealogy, my academic genealogy or my academic family tree. So for Carter G Woodson, it's really personal for me because I learned about Dr. Woodson at church. I was 6, 7, 8 years old when the elders of my church, who were city council members, school superintendents, principals, teachers, so on, they would teach us about Carter G Woodson. And I learned about Black History Month and Negro History Week and what we're supposed to do with that year to year and how we're supposed to spread those messages to the community by the people in my church. So Dr. Carter G Woodson has always been in my heart. So when I got to Howard, it really didn't dawn on me, it really that wasn't part of the elders' teaching that he taught at Howard. So when you look at bios of Carter G Woodson, a lot of times, they don't even mention his time at Howard sometimes. They might say, you know, he was a professor of history at Howard for a year, but they certainly don't talk about the fact that he was dean of liberal arts. And he actually got here in 1918. The catalogs tell us this. I'm an archivist. The catalogs of Howard University tell us that Dr. Carter G Woodson was the first PhD faculty member in the Department of History, and he got here in 1918 as a professor, and he was appointed Dean of Liberal Arts. Now, he used his Dean of Liberal Arts position to usher in or to integrate Africana curricula into Howard University through the history department. Now, the main point of me mentioning Carter G Woodson, or his main contribution to the professionalization of Africana history, is he was able to successfully convince the Board of Trustees that we need Negro study classes. Kelly Miller tried it at first, Alain Locke tried it, and it was turned down. But it was actually Carter G Woodson who introduced graduate study into the Department of History. The first successful master's student of the Department of History was Carter G Woodson's student, and his name was Arnett G. Lindsay. So just laying that kind of foundation for people like me and all the people that I know who came after me, the first graduate student, successful graduate student that come out of the Department of History was his student. And there was only one that year, 1920. And I believe it was in the same program, 1973, that Michael Winston wrote this history in, where Arnett G. Lindsay was invited back to talk about Carter G. Woodson and his time in the history department. He says that, you know, when he found out that they were going to introduce graduate school or graduate studies program, graduate faculty in the history department, that kind of changed his trajectory. He wanted to focus on business administration, and I think he did, but he saw history as a component of business administration, which a lot of people, you won't hear a lot of people say that today. But he thought that history was more important for him as a background to be able to successfully study the Negro in business, or Negro banking, that's what he wanted to write on. So he was one of 7 students to enter into the graduate program under Carter G. Woodson. After the first semester, Dr. Woodson told 3, don't come back. You ain't ready. After the second semester, he told another 3, you no longer are needed here. So the only one to remain was Arnett G. Lindsay, 1 out of that 7. And so before he got his grades, that second semester, Dr. Woodson invited him to his office, and we know what this means. There's some type of ultimatum coming. So he says, I demand 2 things of you if you are going to escape the fate of your predecessors, the 6 students that are no longer in the program with you. First thing, I demand, this is what he told him, I demand that you quit your job. What is he going to do for money? So imagine if your professor demands that you quit your job if you expect to stay in this program. He worked as the head waiter in the dining hall. Okay, so he was a head waiter. The second thing was, I demand that you spend 5 hours a day at the Library of Congress. So that 5 hours a day. He told him this in 1919. 5 hours a day, quit your job, you'll be fine. And he kept an eye on, because Dr. Woodson would go to the dining hall every day and take his lunch, and he made sure that he wasn't in there working. So Arnett G. Lindsay was successful, and he paved the way for me and my colleagues. That's Carter G. Woodson's contribution to the profession. And then there was an argument. He wanted to write about the Negro in banking. Carter G. Woodson said, that sounds like a eulogy. I'm not going to be the one to advance you. That's boring. So he gave him his topic, which was something about, I have it written down, something about Europe and slavery. I can get to the topic later, but that was fine. They agreed on that. About 10 years later, Mr. Lindsay did publish on Negro and banking, and he published in the Journal of Negro History, which Carter G. Woodson already said. So he's paving these ways and sending you on and giving you a professional stage to stand on. William Leo Hansberry. He and Carter G. Woodson are kind of contemporaries in the Washington, D.C. area, but of course, Carter G. Woodson was pushed out or given an ultimatum to leave Howard in 1920. So by the time Hansberry comes along in 22, he's not here. They're not in the same space, but they move in the same circles. Thank you for time. So William Leo Hansberry. If I could go through I could show you a lot of things. Hansberry, like Woodson, went to Harvard. Dr. Woodson got his PhD from Harvard in 1912. Hansberry finished his master's after he got to Howard in 1932. So he had done some professional study, but he wanted to focus on Africa, not Africans in Kentucky, or Africans in California, or Africans in Texas. He wanted to focus on Africans on the continent and ancient Africa and their relationship with Asia and Europe. In 1920s, there was nobody to oversee his study because nobody had done this before. So he was so far ahead of himself, he never got anybody to look at his research for his PhD, and he never got a PhD. But he was always called Dr. Hansberry because people knew who he was from here all across the world. Some of his students, Chancellor Williams, Department of History, John Hiram Clark was his student. Lorraine Hansberry was his niece, so by fault, she's his student. Joseph Harris, the third person, was also his student. And he developed he helped to develop the idea of the diaspora, which is Africa traveling, or Africans being dispersed throughout the world. And not just throughout the world, but traveling within the continent as well. So, and he got these ideas from Hansberry, from learning what he did from Hansberry. So we have the African diaspora studies programs all over the country. We have African studies programs all over the country. We know of master's and PhD students all over the country. And Howard was the first place where all of these things started to happen and really congeal and gel together as far as the professionalization of Africana study. So that's all I'm going to say. I hope maybe we can see the nice documents and photographs that I took the time to scan. Maybe we can do that later, and you'll be able to see that, but we'll talk about that on the panel, I guess. So thank you.
Dr. Josiah, did you want to say just a few words about the department, or are we just going to do that in discussion?
I wanted to say, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I wanted to say a few words on a living graduate of the Department of History. The two previous speakers mentioned those who came before us, on whose shoulders we climbed. But I wanted to say a few words on Dr. Bernice Johnson, who is a genius from the Department of History. In 1989, she received the MacArthur Fellowship. That's called a Genius Award. And so if we speak about those who made us possible today, we must include Dr. Bernice Johnson. Have you ever heard her sing? Well, nightingales, larks, and any songbird you can name have nothing on her. In addition, she has the record with the most number of pages in the Department of History for her PhD. I checked. Songs of the Civil Rights Movement, 1955 to 1965, a study in culture history, was her PhD dissertation in 1975. Dr. Johnson is a cultural historian, professor emerita from American University, and also an emerita from the Smithsonian Institution. But most of all, she formed the group called Sweet Honey in the Rock, a female cappella singing group that has toured places like Australia, Japan, and many countries in Europe. And of course, that takes Howard University to all of those places as well. And to her credit, she has made it generational, because her daughter runs Sweet Honey in the Rock currently. And so we got to also mention the living that were involved with the history department of Howard University. Thank you.
We deliberately did not include the living because we get into a lot of trouble when you do that, because everyone thinks that they're special. And so when you start pulling people out of the group, and she's different, I mean, because I think everyone would agree that she should be included. But I certainly was not going to start determining which of my colleagues deserve to be considered, exceptional. So I guess everything's political. So you have to always be aware of that. So each of you has touched on the idea of the activism of these scholars. These are activist scholars. They're not just intellectuals. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But there's this tradition of activism, especially in the history department, but we know that throughout this campus that's the case. I'm thinking about the fact that at least since 1928, Howard University has had a very close and personal tie with Congress. We are a line item in the federal budget. How did this scholar activism clash, or did it, with the administration's idea of what scholars should be doing, especially since this was global. This wasn't just a national thing, but these are scholars who are getting involved with African independence movements and Pan-Africanism. How did the university respond to that activism?
Well, I can go ahead. Neither Woodson nor Hansberry got their recognition from the university for various reasons, not necessarily because of their activism, but because of what they were doing was so revolutionary. And it scared a lot of people because Hansberry would just come out and write and say, blonde hair, blue eyes come from brown skinned black people with brown. He would come out and say this in his writing, and he would have anthropological, facts, archaeological facts. He would have all kinds of evidence, but he would lay it out, and people didn't really want to touch that. And it's not necessarily about activism. It's about the times that they were living in. This was right after World War I. We're still having this severe lynching problem. We live in a cocoon here on this campus. And the same thing with Carter G. Woodson. They were doing and saying things that, it goes against tradition to not elevate African descent people, but just tell it like it is. Just with the facts and the evidence that that they amassed, they were just telling it like it is. So they didn't necessarily get their just due from Howard University. Woodson certainly was pushed out. Hansberry taught here for 42 years, and he was never recognized by this campus the way he should have been. He went to Ethiopia and got all kinds of recognition. He went to Nigeria and got all kinds of recognition. People were writing him from every corner of the globe, asking him, how do we set up an African Studies department the way that you tried to do? So I wouldn't say that's activism. It was just the times that those two men were living in.
Well, I would say that a lot of it, when you talk about from 1928, we had to talk about the leadership of the first black president of the university, Mordecai Wyatt Johnson. Mm-hmm. So we kind of talk about you have Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, a black man finally leading the university, and then you have these what I call activist scholars in the history department. It didn't always work well together, I don't think, but I do think that they steadfast in doing what they thought was right for black people, what they thought was right for the students who came to Howard University. I do think that in the case of Rayford Logan, for example, who I guess he was kind of considered, even before he became chair, a part of Roosevelt's cabinet, his Roosevelt's kitchen cabinet. I think there was a fine line, and I don't think that people like Rayford Logan got the credit, the due that he should have gotten for his involvement in speaking for black people throughout the world. And so I think that the scholars certainly suffered. Now, you take one scholar, John Hope Franklin, who was a part of the history department. He was recruited and brought in under Logan, and a man like John Hope Franklin left Howard University, went to a white school in about 1956 or so, went to Brooklyn College. And I think, you start seeing scholars see that they could leave and not have to deal with, the ties that the university has always had with funding, federal funding. And then, we kind of see that throughout, since 1920, even to this day, scholars kind of walking that fine line of, how far can we go without jeopardizing the funding for the university.
The only addition I would add would be Chancellor Williams. Similarly, for his research and writings, the type of research and writings Chancellor Williams did, he too wasn't always treated nicely. The testament to his scholarship is the fact that the destruction of black civilization that he published so many decades ago is in print and is still used in classes throughout the United States. So although he was in a, let's call it, mixed situation in the Department of History and Howard, at Howard he continued his research because he was convinced that people of African descent needed to know their history, or else other people would distort it and write it how they saw fit. So Chancellor Williams fits neatly, and of course, Chancellor Williams was born in South Carolina, which is my favorite state. So any discussion must also include the South Carolinian.
Oh, well, all of them were Southerners, though. Hansberry's from Mississippi. Woodson's is West Virginia.
Logan, D.C.
Joseph Harris is North Carolina. These are all rural Southern scholars. So that's interesting that when you say that South Carolina is in there too.
Yeah, and what is that? What is that connection?
I don't know. I don't know what it is. I think about that all the time. Like, I know these areas. Like, where Dr. Harris is from, I know that area, and for him to be exceptional the way that he is, Hansberry's from Mississippi. He's light years ahead of everybody else. I don't know what that is. I don't know why.
Perhaps it is, if you're talking about a Black perspective and they were pushing African and African American history, perhaps because they understood the implications of not knowing that history because of where they grew up. So there's something about growing up in the South and being surrounded by plantations, these old institutions that still survive, and realizing that you need to do something about it. But we all know that in terms of, departments don't exist without students. So what are the students doing? What kind of impact are they making while they're students? Now we know that Bernice Johnson Reagan becomes extremely successful, as do many students from our department. But what are they doing while they're still students enrolled in the university that would impact people globally?
Well, Hansberry was a student. He was a student when he was here teaching. He went back and forth between different schools because people ridiculed him. They were hostile to him. It wasn't just that they were marginalizing him. People were actually hostile to him for saying, look, the Nile Valley is where everybody comes from. We need to look. That was a problem. He was a problem. But he was a student. And he would also talk about, and there are several instances where he would publish an article or a message or a note to the Howard campus or to the Howard community in the Howard University Record and different publications, where he would say, look, Howard, this is your opportunity. You need to take this on, and we need to be the key institution. Where else but Howard? The key institution for the study of the African continent and African people. You're not gonna out chemistry whoever. You're not gonna outlaw you're not gonna out Columbia. African study needs to be focused here, and this is your opportunity. He did that in several instances, year after year after year. And one report that he submitted to the Board of Trustees in 1927, where he's saying, okay, this is what I've done for the last 5 years. I got here in 22. I've done this. This is the classes I taught. These are the theses for the classes. This is what I need from here on out. I need money. I need sabbatical time. I need this. I've had 1,500 students in the past 4 years in my courses. So I don't know, when we talk about the students, we can certainly look at his students, and some of his students went other places and studied higher and wrote letters back to him about what they needed from him, because people were ridiculing them as well.
I think early on we see student protests coming right from the history department. Early on, as far as the beginning of the history department, and right after the First World War. You see students getting involved in protesting in the treatment of African American soldiers when they return back from the First World War. We constantly see the scholarship of the faculty of the history department influencing students at certain points throughout the civil rights movement, the black, the whole Black Studies movement. We see what the professors are, their research, what they're writing about, and the broader global impact of what they're writing about, because a lot of it is certainly far beyond just talking about what's happening in this country, but how it affects Black people throughout the world. I think we certainly can see students involved and then taking up the mantle. We see people like Dr. Olive Taylor, who became a professor and taught right here at Howard University, take up the mantle. I remember hearing Dr. Taylor says this, Afro is a hairstyle. She's African. And she would say that. And I mean, I think we see that, but she was taught by these scholars, and she passed that right down to the other students. I think we constantly see activism from students.
Well, I would focus on the students from the Caribbean and the United States who wanted to pursue their degrees in Latin American and Caribbean history because of a number of reasons. They had to be activists because they were not making a lot of headway. Again, it points to some of the professors that were there at the time. And when I came to Howard in 1990, because I walk all over the place, I encountered some of them who had left the program, and they were working at the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, the DC Public Library. And they all had the same story, that they were constrained in how they could pursue their studies because they didn't have professors versed in Latin American and Caribbean history that would give them the necessary nurturing and support. And you know how women are. I seized the opportunity. I don't know if Dr. Talbert is still here.
He stepped out.
When Dr. Talbert became the chair of the department, to bring all of that to his attention. And he said, don't tell anybody else, I will take action. And he did. So what I'm saying is, there was a time in the department history when it was ambitious to have an Africana program, because if you're doing US and you're doing Africa, well then you gotta have Latin America and the Caribbean. But that ambition was not being achieved because of the lack of nurturing that the students needed. So again, I'll say, I was lucky I got my nurturing from Dr. Medford. I said it when I opened my presentation. I got my nurturing from her when I was doing US history. So that helped me. I like to talk about today. I don't like to talk all the time about the past. So that nurturing helped and fortified me, so that when the time came to make the representation to get a more inclusive Africana program, Dr. Talbert was here. I don't know why he stepped out.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I have a was from I came to Howard in 1996. And by the way, I came from John J. Clark Criminal Justice.
You did?
Yeah, I taught here.
Oh my God.
When I came in 1996, I realized in some sense, like how we needed to rethink this mission. And envy is not a good thing. All right? Envy is not a good thing. By the way, I'm graduated from the Department of Philosophy, so when I think about, so I'm perfectly willing to say, to grant you, let's say, the significance of the history department in relation to the global things, But I would like to hear a little bit about, let's say, the connection between, the history department and, let's say, Locke's New Negro.
Who?
Right.
Elaine Locke. Elaine Locke.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me, by the way, it seems to me one of the great significance, of the history department, and what you're talking about is that, it was during that time, if we keep in mind, by the way, that Harvard was founded in, 1867, and Du Bois was born in 1868, died in 1963. So when you think about what they were doing, right? You're talking about, in a sense, the pivotal moment, let's say, right, in the development of African American self-consciousness. And therefore, the significance of the history department is where, in a sense, you find black folks thinking about ourselves the first time, formulating for ourselves who we want to be, or who we are, who we want to be. And therefore, in some sense, that's part of the great significance, it seems to me, right, of the Department of History, of the idea of Africana thought, roughly speaking, right? So two small things. One is, and I think, by the way, your talk really brought this up. Let's say, the issues of medicine in the Caribbean, all right? So, I mean, to me, it's also, I want to hear a little bit about, back to Mr. Jefferson's, idea of the Mecca, the whole connection, all right, or the whole nexus of things going on that contributed to the development, of Africana consciousness or African American consciousness. That's one small part. And then talking about, going from Dr. Mecca's point about resistance, by the way, I want to just throw in here, right, the fact that only a few years ago, by the way, we formed, a Caribbean Studies program. All right? So given what you mentioned about the tremendous history of Caribbean, right, in the university, right? It's only a few years ago that we were able to form, right, a Caribbean Studies program here at Howard University. And part of it, by the way, is also connected to the federal government and, line items, et cetera, like that. Back to the first part of my question, how would we talk about, how would we begin to rethink, in a way, the idea of power, for today?
Let me take a stab at that. Just a broad stab. So, Logan said that the nadir of race relations was that period during Reconstruction to the early part of the 20th century. And so we find in the early part of the 20th century a cadre of black scholars in one place. I mean, we're talking about great black scholars, Harvard educated, and certainly with a black consciousness. I mean, of course, Elaine Locke is a part of that group of individuals and that faculty right here at Howard University. I mean, we talk about the New Negro, that was published in 1925, Survey Graphic issue of 1925, where he brings in, a whole bunch of individuals that were thinking about black consciousness during what we call the Harlem Renaissance period. I would suggest that, I mean, right here in Washington, D.C. and right here at the Hilltop is where these thoughts began, right here. So, you talk about bringing it all together. That's what when I talk about the Mecca, that's what I mean. That was the Mecca. Now, I think part of your question is, how do we bring that together now? Is that
Yeah,
kind of like we,
yeah.
I mean, and I think Dr. Mefford may speak on this, but, I don't know, this is a totally different day and age. Du Bois talked about the problem of the 20th century being the color line, and we're right back here at the color line in the 21st century. I mean, we haven't left. I mean, we went through the 20th century. I mean, we had great black scholars. They made significant contributions to the literature about black people around the world. And we're right back in the 21st century going like 100 years back because we have individuals that are saying, black people have done make contributions and taking away rights. I mean, so we're right back here. Excuse me? It's still alive, yes. Yeah. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to say any names, but I think we know what I'm talking about. Right. Because this is being videotaped and I don't want Congress to hear about it. But my point is that, I mean, I think we are at a critical point. I mean, we do need leadership like we had from the Howard University History Department. And I've been away, but I mean, Dr. Mefford may have other thoughts about, where we are with the History Department as we move forward compared to where we were certainly in the early part of the 20th century.
Well, our chair is going to give us a few comments on where the History Department is and where we're going. So we want to wrap this up, but we'll take one last question. Maybe two.
Yes. I'm Clifford Kinney, junior political science major from Ferguson. You spoke a lot about activism and scholarship. As a young activist myself, I'm just wondering what words can you provide for students who are struggling right now to find the words for these times, to describe these times and to write, not only for ourselves, but for future generations, specifically in regards to what's going on now, the political climate.
I would ask you, why are you struggling?
No, not myself.
Oh,
no,
there's other students,
just throwing it out there.
because I think that in the past, there was no option. It wasn't a struggle, it's what you had to do. I mean, you do this for those that are coming behind you. That's what Dr. Josiah talked about. We talked about the shoulders in which we stand. Who's going to stand on your shoulders? And folks in the class, your class now, who's going to stand on their shoulders? I mean, I don't see how, especially when you come here and you hear who was here before and what was done before, how you can't step out there and be a student activist. I mean, I kind of don't understand it. I know that when I was here years ago, there was a protest because the president of the university wanted to have Lee Atwater on the board of trustees. And what did students do? Students took over the A building. I mean, they had a protest. I mean, it was a political statement. And I'm waiting to see, what the students are going to do in regard to where the political climate and social and racial climate we're in now. I'm curious.
But they do. When was it, a couple of weeks ago when James Comey was here? The students made their sentiments felt. So they did something. I mean, their contemporaries, the ones we could talk about with Atwater and what's the guy from South Africa that Moore State had wanted to be commencement speaker or something. The students at the time made their sentiments felt. And that didn't sit well with a lot of the Howard community. The same thing with these students a couple of weeks ago that made their sentiments felt. They're still activists. So that is not lost. It still continues.
Yours will be
Since I bridged that era with this era, and I was actually walking through the campus when that so-called whatever occurred. I'm a child of the 60s. I think I remember your face. I used to work in the A building and register students and everything.
Oh, okay. No, I wasn't here in the 60s though.
The African Studies Department.
Yes.
And I earned my PhD under Leon Damas. So I know the great people who came through here because they were hard taskmasters, and I picked them. Because I knew that when I finished these classes, I would learn. I wouldn't get a degree, I would earn a degree. C.L.R. James is one we should mention because he taught me also twice, as taskmaster. because he is the connectivity with Hansberry, Locke, from Douglas, Carter G Woodson, all the way down to today, in terms of us being Pan-Africanists at Howard University. C.L.R. James taught here, and some of you don't know that. And I'm trying to find out why when I sit with students from Howard in my yard, under a tree, and talk about C.L.R. James and Damas, they're looking at me like, who? Like certain people talk about Frederick Douglass, but we won't call the names today. Okay. Sir Arthur Burke taught in the Department of History. He also taught at UWI, a great historian. Okay. But the question is, those are statements, I guess, because I'm a linguist, not a historian. That was my worst subject, by the way. But anyhow, I like geography, traveled the world, been to 80-something countries, but trust me, history just wouldn't stick, languages stick. I am really trying to see, though, the progress. Oh, and Winston worked in the Moorland room. He gave me my books. I worked him to death. And then he became vice president or whatever, provost or whatever. The same thing, no different. Okay, so I'm trying to see the progress between 50 years ago when I came here at 19, hello, I'll be 17 February, I can give her my birthday gift then. And where we are now, because what I saw in front of the Crampton, that was phony compared to our stuff in the 60s. Now I was a little girl from Jamaica, so I had to keep my mouth shut and not say a word because they would sent me straight back to Kingston, to Mona. But I'm trying to see, because stuff was done then. That was serious stuff. And I walked from Meridian Hill when the whole city was burning and all that drama. I'm not saying, I don't believe in I'm like Gandhi, sort of. But I still think activism should be activism, not the blow up bugle like we're going to have a party next week under the tree and then it's over. You have to follow through with activism. And it's not about, what did you say, sir, to him? It's not about, what were you saying? The word you used, the key word, and he corrected you, but you said it wasn't you.
Struggle.
Struggle.
No, I don't think
whatever the word is. You have to, if you want to take a stand, you have to use those words as if you own them. You can't back off and say, okay, I want to help Howard, but it's not really me. You understand? You have to stick up with penal fortitude to what you believe in. Thank you.
Let me
so
just.
My question is, what's happening now? What, you know?
Let me just add.
If we could do it very briefly, because
Yeah.
we're way beyond the time.
Howard University publishes a lot of periodicals and magazines. And if you read them, you will see the number of activities that students are involved in across the Americas and Africa that are activists. It may not be political activism, but it is path-breaking activism that current Howard students are participating in. So you don't have to encounter them in the yard or outside Crampton. There are other places being active. If you read the Alumni magazines and the other magazines, all that information is there. So it's not one-dimensional. It has many facets and aspects to it.
We will have closing remarks. Thank you so much, Pam. We'll have closing remarks. I invite our chair, Dr. Nikki Taylor, forward. I just want to say a few words about Dr. Taylor. Dr. Taylor assumed leadership of the Department of History in January this year. In just a few short months, she has made major strides toward taking our department to the next level, to a place where we can say with certainty, we don't just study history, we make it. Dr. Taylor received her PhD
PhD from Duke University and is the author of 3 books, the latest being Driven Toward Madness, The Fugitive Slave Margaret Garner, and Tragedy on the Ohio. So Dr. Taylor, please come up and give us some final words.
Thank you. I'll make this very brief. I know some of you have stayed longer than you had hoped, but I'd like to first thank Rhea Ballard-Thrower for allowing us to have this program, and Celia Daniel for her tremendous effort of pulling this together. We're very grateful to you, very appreciative. Sonia Woods, our student, who's also an archivist, is another, the impact of the history department is wide-ranging. You see our scholars everywhere, even here in this library. I'd also like to thank my colleague, Dr. Edna Medford, who is on leave right now and came back to be a part of this. And Julius Jefferson for taking the time out to come back home. Welcome back. And finally, to our speaker, I've learned so much today from Dr. Barbara Josiah, and so I'd like you all to thank them again for all of their contributions. One of our informal models for the Department of History, which we haven't yet copywritten, but it's come to Howard where history matters. History is a double entendre in that saying. So, you know, the Howard Department of History is central to the mission, to the past, to the present of Howard University. And in my opinion, not just because I'm very proud of this department, I think the strength of the Department of History is a measure of the strength of the university. In a lot of ways, we are that measure, that checking force for the university. And right now, we are very strong. I think Dr. Medford would agree because of her leadership, and I came as the backup quarterback to bring this home. But and Ms. Daniel stated it earlier that the history department at Howard looms very large in the history of Howard, and I agree. I couldn't agree with you anymore, Ms. Daniels. This panel reminds us the Department of History at Howard has not only transformed the minds of young people all over the world, but also the discipline of history, as well as the intellectual discourse about people of African descent around the globe. It has also transformed the professoriate. You've heard today about all the many scholars who have come out of that department, and while many of them didn't stay at Howard, they went on to educate at some of the nation's leading educational institutions. And so we've had our imprint on the world in so many different ways. Our history in this department is littered with proof that the department trains intellectuals with depth and purpose. And in that vein, I'd like to have our graduate students stand up. Can you all stand up? Thank you. We are very proud of them, and I'll say a little bit about them. We have one of the biggest classes in about, 2 decades, right, Dr. Medford? 15 new PhD students. And so we're very proud. Every single day I'm inundated with emails from students all over the country asking, can I come meet you? Can I come meet your department? Are you there on Wednesday? And so there's a new energy abounding in the universe. We're working on getting them funding. 100% of them have funding. Not full funding, but we're working on that. And so I'm really proud of the fact that these students could have gone anywhere. I read all of their applications and they chose to come to Howard. And so that says a lot about the strength of our department. In addition to that, I want to talk about my faculty. So a lot of them have left by now. Faculty, can you raise your hand? I see Dr. Tolley and Dr. Medford. So maybe only a few of us. And although we're a small body, we have written 26 books. And so we're still doing the work and carrying on the legacy of Carter G. Woodson and Murs Tate and Chancellor Williams, and the list goes on and on and on. The Department of History, many of those books are prize-winning books. We had a colleague who was on the Pulitzer Prize Committee, which is no small thing. We've had scholars that are a part of the Executive Council for Carter G. Woodson's organization, ASALA, Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Not only are we proud of our history, we're proud of our present, and we're very much encouraged about the things that we've put afoot already in this short period of time since January. The first thing that we're really focused on is strengthening our undergraduate program. And so with that, we had to re-energize our curriculum. And so that is done. It's being pushed forward to the curriculum committee. We have proposed a new program on law and history for those students who want to pursue a law degree. And it's unlike any other so-called pre-law program in the country. So look forward to that. Our public history is growing by leaps and bounds, and Dr. Clark Lewis is Hercules, in my opinion. She, on the shoulders, her two shoulders, she carries this program, and she's educated people like Sonia Woods, and the list goes on. And so we're growing that, and that's going to be something we really focused on building in the next couple of years. We're strengthening our U.S. history program. We have a new scholar, Kay Wright Lewis, who just joined us. So she's a colonialist, and we look forward to the courses that she's going to be offering as well. And we're definitely making an impact in terms of getting the name of our department. Maybe we're striving to have our name where it was when people like Merce Tate and all these others that they've talked about today mentioned. We want to return it to that honor, that esteem, that legacy. And so we're doing that. And we have all the tools in place to do that. Number one, the students. Number two, the faculty, the scholarship, and the voice in the discipline and beyond. So I just encourage you to continue to support our department, continue to keep your eye on what we're doing. A lot of it is being broadcast on Facebook, or documented, I'll say, on Facebook. And we're really proud of where it's going. So I want to thank you all again for coming on this very bleak day, and thank you all for coming as well.
Okay, come on, go ahead. Okay, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. Next month, African Studies is going to be featured. We're going to feature the Department of African Studies, and so we're looking forward to that. And in December, Dr. Carr says we're going to feature African American Studies. All right, so we have these to look forward to. What I'd like to do right now is that we have a small reception upstairs in the treasure room, and I'd like you all to attend. Thank you.